What's going on, YouTube? We're back at it for another video, and today we've got the meta Sentry loadout. Now, with the most recent patch, we've had more than a few changes to some of these sentries, and for the better. They are much more viable now, and even creating an entire loadout around sentries is highly viable now, and arguably meta. More than likely, you're going to have a fantastic time with this one, and I've had more than a good bit of fun with it myself, and I'll be playing with it much more in the future. Now, this one specifically for the Terminid. I'll make another one of these that specifically goes for the automatons, as there's a few changes I'll probably make with it, but this one for certain is guaranteed to make it through Helldive difficulty and give you every bit of the fun you've been looking for when it comes down to a Sentry loadout. With that being said, let's jump into the stratagems you'll need in order to build out this loadout. Coming up first, we've got the QUASAR cannon, which this is going to be a huge benefit to us, as it's going to give us the capability of not only being able to dish out some of that damage consistently and almost infinitely throughout the entire match against something like Bile Titans and Chargers, but it'll also help us protect some of our sentries in those moments when they are out there. As we all know, every single bug seems to get the biggest hard on every single time they see any type of sentry drop into the battlefield. As soon as they see any type of mechanical device start to move, they immediately just descend on it every single time, like they're a dog just smelling, well, heat in the air, if you know what I mean. And they just immediately bum rush over and try to throw their body at it and destroy it. Especially Chargers. There's nothing worse than that moment. But with the QUASAR cannon, we do have the capability of not only dishing out some of that damage towards Bile Titans, effectively helping out the capability of our sentries to be able to destroy those Bile Titans as quickly as possible before they reach over to our sentries, but at the same time, being able to stagger and slow down Chargers before they're able to throw their body at those sentries is going to be a huge benefit to us at giving an overall survivability chance to our sentries to maximize their effectiveness and deplete their entire ammo reserves, giving us the maximum benefit of each one of these sentries. Along with that, the infinite ammo is going to benefit us, as anytime that we're on cooldown, we'll still have some capability of dealing with those heavily armored targets, even when we don't have something to call in those certain moments. And along with that, we don't need a backpack with this one, so if we do have a teammate that does end up having the shield generator or any other type of backpack that may benefit the team or ourselves, they'll be able to call that in, and we'll be able to utilize that at the same point that we're using with this sentry. Coming up right after that, we've got our first sentry, which is going to be the rocket sentry, which had one of the biggest changes done to it. Not only is it now firing one rocket at a time, which makes it more consistent when it comes to the output of the actual rockets, as it's just one volley after the next, and it will be consistently dealing damage across the board. When it comes to 46 total rockets, this thing will be having quite a large uptime if it will have the capability of surviving that long, but hopefully with this build you should be able to maintain that. And one of the number one things about every sentry is positioning. You want to make sure that you find a little bit away from the bug breach or objective that you may be placing down one of these sentries, giving the time for the sentry to actually deal with the targets before they get a little bit too close. Especially with the rocket sentry, even just one bug getting too close will cause it to stop firing, and it will succumb to even the smallest of ticks if you allow them to get too close and just keep attacking it. It is very frustrating, but thankfully we'll be pretty close with this sentry build to be able to protect them and maintain that we will get the maximum benefit and use out of each one of the sentries that we deploy. But when it comes down to some of the other changes to the rocket sentry, this was originally something that would immediately only go for larger targets or heavily armored targets. Now it has a little bit of its damage reduced, but it has a multi-use function now at this point, which is going to include dealing with crowd control as well as dealing with those heavily armored targets. The lessened damage does mean it will take more rockets to take out something like a Bile Titan or a Charger, but the bigger benefit to the rocket sentry is that we can combine this with other stratagems, the QUASAR cannon, or even maybe something like the HMG emplacement, in order to blow off the armor of something like a Bile Titan or a Charger and be able to effectively take them out a whole lot quicker. But the other aspect to it that is going to benefit us is going to be its crowd control factor at the same time with the large amount of rockets we have with this. There's nothing worse than those bloaty bugs, those little nursing spewer, the bile spewers. Those things can just eat up any type of ammo unless it's explosive, and with the rocket sentry this is going to be a huge benefit for us, as it will have an explosive radius now up to 4 meters, and it will be able to take out those units much more easily, as well as just dispersing some of those crowds as they're coming out of the bug breach. So locking down bug breaches with something like the rocket sentry is going to be a whole lot easier now, and dealing with any of the enemies across the board that may spawn with it. And do be mindful, there is blowback on the back side of that rocket sentry, so you want to keep a little bit of a distance so you don't get knocked over, especially if you've got some type of stratagem you're trying to throw in. There's been more than a few moments where I've gotten a little bit of that blowback and ended up causing too much damage. And do keep in mind that a lot of different damage types can destroy these sentries, including napalm and the gas. So make sure that you do throw these sentries a little bit off of the beaten path, not in the direct line of fire. That way you're not ending up wasting some of those sentries on just a teammate, or if you're playing with randoms, you know they're going to start throwing cluster bombs, eagle airstrikes, any different direction. If they're caught within it, it's another one of those moments that could be a wasted sentry. Positioning is everything with the sentries. And one little side note about the rocket sentry when it comes to the rockets hitting a charger: if the charger is in full charge, the rocket sentry's rockets can actually deviate the path of the charger and actually push it to the left or the right. It's kind of funny, it doesn't always work perfectly, but there are times where it can completely push a charger off of its direction and keep you from actually getting hit if said person is in an HMG emplacement. Coming up right after that, we've got the HMG emplacement, which is going to pair really well when it comes to the rocket sentry. Both of these go hand in hand with each other and can almost completely complement each other. And more importantly, when it comes down to the HMG emplacement, with this recent patch, we did end up getting a buff to it for its quality of life rotation speed. Rotation speed before was extremely slow. It felt as though as soon as you started turning outside of a 90-degree radius into the rest of its 360-degree radius that it has available to it, it would end up starting to slow down to the point where it felt as though you were walking through straight up liquefied mud, sand, maybe even just stuck in quicksand. It just would not rotate very quickly. And when it came down to a situation where you needed to turn all the way around 180 degrees and there was a certain enemy that might have been directly on top of you, more than likely that might have been a death sentence. But thankfully now it feels 10 times faster, even though it is definitely just 100% faster, so it's just 2 times faster. But it feels 10 times faster when it comes down to how fast it's actually turning now. And it feels so much better. And you'll be able to quickly rotate from target to target. Even if there's something 180 degrees behind you, you'll be able to whip this thing around and be able to take out that target before it finishes you off. And on top of that, the HMG has always been a powerhouse. This thing has medium armor penetration. It can take out hulks. It can take out chargers. It can't blow through heavily armored targets, but that's where the combination of this with the rocket sentry is going to come in very nicely. Now, along with that, we can pop out of this with the QUASAR cannon to land some of those shots on something like a charger's leg, or land those shots on the backside of a Bile Titan, as if we expose those weak spots, get back into the HMG, and start landing the shots with the HMG, we'll actually be able to take out these targets really quickly. So we've got a little bit of a trifecta combination going on here between the QUASAR cannon, the HMG, and the rocket sentry. So we've got crowd control, we've got heavy target decimation going on. We are just dominating with these 3 stratagems right here, and it is an absolute good time. There's nothing better than this moment. I've been having so much more fun with this, and I would highly suggest trying this one out. That combo of just having the rocket sentry right next to you, making sure that it's a little bit higher, or hopefully in a position that doesn't immediately seem as though it is going to, fire that rocket directly at you. You do want to keep in mind, if you're placing these somewhere close to each other, you want to make sure that you're not in between the line of sight of the rocket sentry and the enemy, as it will still blow you up if you're in the way. But as long as you can actually position these properly, they are going to be a powerhouse duo. And one thing I forgot to mention about the HMG is if you are not inside of the HMG emplacement, the chargers and Bile Titans won't actually aggro onto it, so in certain moments where you fear it may get destroyed, try to just jump out and run away, and it should save the HMG. Welcome to the HMG emplacement. Welcome to the Earth. And coming up last, we've got the autocannon Sentry. This one's going to be all about that powerhouse. This is the absolute maximum damage dealer right here. It can burn through its ammo pretty quickly, but when it comes down to taking down Bile Titans, Chargers, Charger Behemoths, this damage is just unmatched when it comes to the other sentries, and it is going to be a perfect combination. If you're able to throw this out along with the rocket sentry and have the HMG emplacement on top of that, holding down certain things like the geological survey with those objectives where you're taking the soil samples and then getting the seismic readings, and you constantly have one of those bug breaches, lining these up for those moments with those bug breaches and creating that defensive perimeter by placing these properly is going to be a huge powerhouse combo. You're going to be locking down every one of those bug breaches and any bug breaches in between that you may be running into. As long as you're getting that positioning right, which is the #1 key thing, the autocannon, the rocket sentry, and the HMG are going to be the perfect combination at just holding any one of those positions that you're fortifying with these sentries, it is going to be an absolute powerhouse combo, and using the HMG to clean up some of the trash to make sure that the autocannon and the rocket sentry are focusing on the heavily armored targets is going to be a huge benefit. And on top of that, no matter what, both the autocannon and the rocket sentry are going to have an explosive radius to them, so they are going to end up inadvertently being an absolute crowd control machine on top of that, so it is just going to be burning through those crowds really quickly. And when it comes to making sure that something like a Bile Titan or a Charger is stopped before they actually make it over to your sentries, or you in particular, the autocannon is going to help greatly in those situations. As there is no doubt about it, the autocannon will stop pretty much anything in its tracks as long as it has the time to keep firing off those rounds quick enough, as well as being able to stagger things like the Charger and the Bile Titan with any one of its strikes. There will be a cooldown time in between those shots, but quite often it will be able to stagger Chargers and Bile Titans to give it a bit more time for something like the rocket sentry or you with the HMG, or popping out with that QUASAR cannon to get one of those shots on the legs to finish it off even quicker and try to conserve on that total ammo of something like the autocannon and the rocket sentry to move on to the next targets and really dish out the maximum amount of damage we can get out of each one of these sentries. And one thing to keep in mind when it comes down to positioning with the autocannon, you do want to make sure that this one does not have any type of surface right next to it, or if you're putting it up on high ground, you want to make sure it is very close to the edge, as this is one of those sentries that will blow itself up very easily. If it has the capability of aiming down towards the ground or maybe a wall right next to it, it will blow itself up really quickly, so do keep that in mind. Now, that being said, there are some alternative options that you could use when it comes down to the sentries, and I would highly suggest if you're going to replace one of the sentries with a different sentry, the autocannon is the one that I would actually replace. The rocket sentry seems to be a staple right now, and it is working very efficiently at the crowd control and dealing damage towards heavily armored targets, and it just pairs so well with the HMG emplacement. It's just not something that I'd want to take out. But if you are going to replace something for a little bit more of that crowd control, the Gatling Sentry can be an excellent option to choose, as it will be burning through some of those crowds. It has a high fire rate, and at certain times it does seem as though it may have more ammunition than the machine gun sentry right now. I'm not certain whether or not they've actually reduced the total ammunition of the machine gun sentry, as before it did seem the slower fire rate with the machine gun sentry seemed to make it last a little bit longer before, but now that they've reduced the cooldown on the machine gun sentry by an entire minute to where it's every 2 minutes available, it does seem to burn through pretty quickly. It may still have medium armor penetration on it, but it does not have the same clearing power as the Gatling Sentry. So in general, even if it does have 1 minute less with the machine gun sentry, I think the Gatling Sentry is the better option. But you could also go with something like the EMS Mortar Sentry. This is going to be something that you could throw just behind the HMG emplacement and the rocket sentry to kind of slow down those targets from advancing, keeping them stuck inside of the actual bug breach, and even more so, can stop those Chargers dead in their tracks and make them much easier targets. The only thing it won't stop is a Bile Titan, but this could be something that could prove to be quite useful for you and the team, as well as just maintaining survivability of your sentries on top of that, slowing down the crowd and the Chargers to maintain focus on something like a Bile Titan that may be closing in, pop out, throw that QUASAR cannon towards the back of that Bile Titan and take that one out pretty quickly, and then start focusing on the crowd and the Chargers. It could make working through that crowd a whole lot easier for you, and locking down that position a much more smooth and pleasant experience. And when it comes down to the QUASAR cannon, if you wanted a different option to kind of shake things up but still had that same anti-tank kind of feel to it, we have the Spear, which right now superior packing methodology is not working, but the Spear is working much better than it was before, and it did get a buff today, so it will be able to take out Shrieker Towers and those Spore Spewers, the Spore Trees, in just one shot, and it will lock onto them from across the map. So it is very useful right now, but sadly enough, when it comes down to ammo economy, when it comes to not having superior packing methodology working right now, it can hinder you a little bit, and it can make some of those instances where you would benefit a little bit more from the QUASAR cannon having that infinite ammo with protecting your sentries and maintaining their overall survivability. But if you're looking to kind of shake things up and have a little bit of fun, the Spear is going to be definitely a good time right now. I'll be making a build out of this one a little bit later on its own that doesn't focus more towards the sentries, as I feel as the QUASAR cannon is a better option. But if you're looking to change things up and have a little bit of fun with the Spear, it's not a bad combination. And if you can rely on those teammates to have a little bit more damage towards those heavily armored targets and maintain your sentries still have survivability, this can be a good combination. And if you dive forward for whatever reason, it will cause more damage. So there are times where you can one-shot behemoth chargers with this if you're aiming towards the front of them, towards their head, and then dive forward while you shoot. And the same thing can happen with Bile Titans. It's a bit consistent. It's not 100%, but I've had it happen more than 70% of the time that I've dove forward while I'm directly in front of them, locked on towards the head, that it seems to be the route that seems to work right now. For whatever reason, if you're backpedaling or standing still, you won't be getting this additional damage that it feels that the spear actually has. I don't know what's going on with that, but hopefully they'll fix that in the coming future. And now let's talk about the primary weapons and the armor passives for the Meta Sentry loadout. Now, when it comes down to the primary weapon, the Breaker Incendiary is my top #1 pick when it comes to facing off with the Terminid. It's perfect for crowd control, which really helps us with this build specifically, considering we do have a cooldown time on the HMG emplacement and some of the other stratagems we have available to us. The QUASAR cannon is only dealing with heavily armored targets, so we need something of a primary that's going to help us out with those moments of just mulching through those crowds when we don't have those sentries available for us. And the Breaker Incendiary is going to come through in those moments every single time. Being able to just spray out with that flame across the entire horizon into that sea of hunters that you may be facing off with, and it is just going to burn them out and put them back into that dirt they crawled out of. Let's see, you've got somebody on the team that ends up being pretty good at crowd control and has that pretty much locked down for themselves. You can't go wrong with something like the Scorcher, which is going to be excellent, well-rounder, just make sure not to shoot anything directly in front of your face. On top of that, the Punisher is an excellent option that has the stagger power, will be able to bully and push around a lot of those units, stop those bloaty bugs from being able to puke on you, and just overall decent damage output, along with ammo economy being pretty easy to manage, considering you'll be shell loading this every single time, not wasting magazines if you only burn through half of it and start to reload. And if you're just somebody that loves ARs, the Tenderizer isn't too bad when facing off with the Terminid, as long as you're not too worried about having to constantly have to reload this weapon. It will be all about precision with this one, so do make sure to hit those headshots, but if you are making those headshots, it's not too bad. When it comes down to the secondary, I would highly suggest the grenade pistol. This is going to help us out with those moments of closing bug holes, considering we don't have any of those stratagems available to quickly take those out, and this is just going to help with taking out those nests and maintaining superiority over those secondary objectives if you're one of those people that likes to go into a match and complete every objective across the entire map. This is something that's going to help us out in those moments. But you also can't go wrong with something like the Redeemer or possibly even the Bushwhacker. But it's all going to be up to your personal preference at that point. When it comes down to your grenade, I would highly suggest going with a stun grenade. This is something that can help with the overall survivability of our sentries. We'll be able to stop those chargers in their tracks and use the QUASAR cannon on them. This is something that can stop them before they're able to actually march over to our sentries and destroy them. This can be something that just ends up being a little bit life-saving, as well as something that can be life-saving for you when it comes to large crowds that may be descending on you, or just being able to stop some of those chargers before they've crushed you. But if you don't have the stun grenade, or if you're looking for something that's better at going against some of those side objectives, you can't go wrong with the high explosive or possibly the impact. But if you're also looking for a little bit more crowd control, the incendiary impact or the G10 incendiary are great for locking down some of those positions. Just throwing this directly on top of one of those bug breaches can be a huge benefit for you. At just burning out those crowds that'll be coming up out of that ground. And when it comes down to the armor, I will state this up front, you definitely don't have to wear heavy armor. I just wear heavy armor all the time. I think it looks better. What we're going to really talk about is the armor passive specifically. I generally go with the medkit armor passive for a build like this. It just increases my overall survivability, increases the capability of our stims, especially if we're working with that new booster that gives us that speed boost. The 2 seconds of additional duration we get from each one of the stims and the 2 additional stims that we have available to us with this build just further increases our survivability and gives us the capability of maintaining that speed boost and stamina for longer whenever we use a stim. As if you don't have the medkit armor passive with that 2 additional seconds of stim effect, you won't have that infinite stamina for the full duration of that speed boost, and you will burn through more of your stamina while you're going forward. Whereas with this 2 additional seconds, it'll give you about half of that stamina by the time that speed boost runs out, so that way you're not completely depleted by the time that you've actually run the full course of it. But you can't also go wrong with using something like Democracy Protects, giving you that 50% reduction to possibly dying, Or even something like the engineering kit, which is going to give you the capability of having 2 additional throwables. 2 additional stun grenades can be pretty powerful with this, increasing the overall survivability of our sentries and getting the maximum benefit of the output of each one of those sentries, maintaining their full life cycle and being able to dispense their full amount of ammo is going to be a huge benefit for us. But that's going to be the Meta Sentry loadout right there. I've had a good bit of fun with this one, and I've been playing around with it for more than a few matches. As long as you have the right combination of people that are working with, Eagle Airstrike or some different groups of crowd control stratagems on top of that, and you can just get the positioning right with those sentries, you are going to be a powerhouse with this loadout. It is going to be a ton of fun, and even if everybody rolled in with this type of loadout, and as long as they knew their proper positioning whenever there was a bug breach or some heavily armored targets, it could be an absolute destroyer when it comes to group composition. But let me know how you're feeling about it down in the comments below. How do you feel about the Sentry changes? Have you been playing around with them more often? Arguably, there's so many different builds that I'd probably put the HMG emplacement in now at this point, as it's just such a good time, and it does have that capability of crowd control. I'm able to control it. But let me know down below which one of the Sentries is your favorite right now. What's your combination when it comes to your Sentry loadout? And how you're feeling about the patch overall. I've got more than a few of those meta loadouts coming out in the next few days, so hit that subscribe button. We've got plenty more of that content coming in the future, as well as some of that Elden Ring coming up here, if you're interested in checking that out as well. But if you'd also like to see some of this content live, hit that link down in the description below. Follow me over at Twitch. We'll be streaming daily, and on that note, have a good one.